Councilmember Steckler, would you please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Naomi, roll call, please.
We lost Naomi.
Naomi, you're muted.
Sorry, I had some technical difficulties with my mouse. Mayor Holtzclaw. Now we don't hear you.
Ryan, you're muted.
I'm supposed to be muted on that screen.
Oh, okay, you're good now. I can hear you.
Okay, present.
Mayor Pro Tem Vanel,
Here.
Councilmember Bond,
Here.
Councilmember Cavallari,
Here.
Councilmember Steckler.
Here.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. We'll begin before we get to the swearing-ins with audience communication. Would anyone like to address the council tonight on anything on the agenda, not on the agenda? And quick as always to the draw was Barb. Barb, go ahead, name and address in 3 minutes, please, and then followed by Will.
Barb Heidel, 1401 144th Place, Southeast Mill Creek. Thank you, Mayor. I wish to acknowledge and thank Matthew Combs and his great Public Works crew for setting up and taking down all the displays for Veterans Day. Well done. Also, thank you to Jody and Scott for a job well done also, adding their own touches to honor and thank all our veterans. Thank you to Starbucks for the free coffee and Town and Country Market for free donuts for all the veterans. Great job all around. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. Will?
Can't hear. Can't hear.
Will Nelson, 14925 29th Drive, Southeast Mill Creek, Washington. Regarding the proposed tax increases, I wonder why we need tax increases with a multi-million-dollar grant from the federal government. I believe any tax increases, if necessary, could probably be covered in the following manner. And I remember former Director Grantham talking about this a few years ago, and that money from the Surface Water Fund, or whatever it's called, can be used to purchase street sweepers. Also, in the previous presentations, especially the spreadsheet, there was a couple of instances of members, directors, and council members pointing out that we could purchase street sweepers with the government grant. Since we can do that and it doesn't violate any laws or restrictions on the use of the money, we could purchase a couple of street sweepers with those funds and take money from the equipment reserve fund, purchase fund, and use that to cover any necessary tax increases. I also recall that during the bonding discussions for the surface water piping repairs, that the former director of the planning department suggested we add money into the bonds for street sweepers. And I also know that recall the former mayor, asking for additional funds be added to that bonding issue, which I believe was done. So I think there's sufficient money to cover a couple of street sweepers, and then we could take money out of the equipment reserve fund to cover any necessary tax increases. As to the second subject, as to the fire contract, we all know that the prices are going to go up for fire service. It's inevitable under the current conditions. All I would ask is that we make sure that it's equitable for the taxpayers, and that if we go with a District 1 contract or any other contract, I would prefer District 1 myself, that for every penny the city saves, that every penny should be returned to the property taxpayers. If it's 86 cents or whatever that one slide was on a previous presentation, then it should be 86 cents reduction in property taxes. And that's about it. The only other thing I'd like to say is that there's probably going to have to be a ballot initiative on this. And if necessary, I'd like to be on the con committee, just in case. Thank you.
Else that'd like to address the council tonight? Okay, hearing none, there'll be another opportunity at the end of the meeting, and now we will get on to the swearing ins. For the public's benefit, we had 2 positions that were vacated last year that the council made appointments. Because those are midterm vacancies, the people who were appointed served until the next election when they had to stand for election if they wanted to run. So because of that, the people who won those elections with Melissa Duque and Connie Allison get sworn in tonight because they pick up for the term up until when the election is certified. So with that, Ms. Duque, did I pronounce it correctly? It's going to be a challenge for me between that Duque and Vignell. She is on vacation, didn't realize that she needed to be sworn in. So we are going to do it. She has signed her oath. I will swear her in momentarily. And then we will do some kind of recognition when you are back in town. I understand sometime in December. So with that, City Attorney, I assume she just needs to raise her right hand. She doesn't necessarily need to stand, and so we wouldn't see her. Is that correct? I see him nodding his head. So Melissa, if you'd please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Melissa Duque,
Having been duly elected to the office of council member
having been duly elected to the office of council member
of the city of Mill Creek, Washington,
of the city of Mill Creek, Washington,
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear and affirm
that I will faithfully, impartially, and to the best of my ability
that I will faithfully, impartially, and to the best of my ability
perform the duties of my office as prescribed by law,
perform the duties of my office as prescribed by law,
and that I will support and maintain the laws and ordinances
and that I will support and maintain the laws and ordinances
of the city of Mill Creek
of the city of Mill Creek
and the laws and constitution of the state of Washington and the United States of America.
and the laws and constitution of the state of Washington and the United States of America.
Congratulations, council member.
Thank you so much.
We're recognizing you in a few weeks. So with that, we are going to go to in person. We'll put on masks and move down below. Joe, do we have mics set up?
Did you at least go somewhere fun, Melissa?
Yes.
Check, check.
Yes, I'm actually here in my hometown of in Long Beach, California. It's my dad's birthday today.
Sweet.
Nice.
Happy birthday to
Very
him.
fun.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
You have another one? You comfortable without a mask?
Yeah.
Raise your right hand.
We'll be doing the real thing here in just a second.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, look back there.
Break your mask.
Mhm.
Remember when someone did it to me and made it a little too long. Okay. You ready?
Yes,
Okay. I state your name,
I, Connie Allison,
having been duly elected to the office of council member of the city of Mill Creek, Washington,
having been duly elected to the city of Mill Creek.
to the
Council-
office of the
to the office of-
council member of the city of Mill Creek, Washington.
Thank you. Yes, and the mask won't stay on. It broke. To the office of council member of the city of Mill Creek, Washington,
I'll shorten them. Do solemnly swear or affirm
I do solemnly swear and affirm
that I will faithfully, impartially,
that I will faithfully and impartially,
and to the best of my ability,
and to the best of my abilities,
perform the duties of my office
perform the duties of my office
as prescribed by law,
as prescribed by law,
and that I will support and maintain
and that I will support and maintain
laws and ordinances of the city of Mill Creek
the laws and ordinances of the city of Mill Creek
and the laws and constitution of the state of Washington
and the laws and constitution of the state of Washington
and the United States of America.
and the United States of America.
Congratulations, council member.
Thank you.
Congratulations, you're on board. You're official.
Okay. I'm going to ask if we can have unanimous consent to a couple adjustments to the agenda tonight. First, I'd like to move up, if there's no objection, the park board appointments that we deferred from last week. I think that should take just a minute. And the second is to then move into our executive session. Our consultant who's working with us on the topic of the executive session is on the East Coast, 3 hours ahead of us. And so if we wait till the end of the meeting to have our executive session, we'll be pushing him possibly into tomorrow. So if there's no objection, we'll do those two items and then move back to the agenda. Is there any objection?
Objection.
No objection.
Okay, with that, I believe we turn it back to the Mayor Pro Tem for the Parks and Recreation Board appointments.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to appoint 2 volunteers to serve a term on the Parks and Recreation Board expiring October 31st, 2024. And those 2 volunteers are Tanis Golubowski and Jeff Doan. Congratulations. We had lots of wonderful volunteers, just as we always do. And I know they are going to do a great job stepping up, and they've got some big shoes to fill with Melissa joining us here on the council. And I'm looking forward to working with Tanis and Jeff. Thank you.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, I made the motion.
I'd like to second that motion.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, and with all those in favor of the motion to appoint the people to the Parks Board, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes 7-0. Sorry, I'm just stuttering. Grant, how long do you expect we will need in executive session tonight?
Approximately 25 minutes, Mayor.
Okay, so that puts us, let's go 6:45. That work?
That'll be fine.
Okay, so bear with me. I got to read.
And I don't know if Melissa knows that she will be swooped in.
Swooped.
I don't know.
Okay, so we will be adjourning to executive session to discuss the status of collective bargaining negotiations pursuant to RCW 42.30.140 subsection 4. And action will not be taken. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mayor.
Correct. So no action will be taken. So we will adjourn to executive session until 6:45.
Council has an extended executive session for another 10 minutes to 6:50. Council is extending executive session until 7 PM.
We are going to move on now to, I'm sorry, the council concluded its executive session at 6:59 and change, and we're back into regular session at 7 o'clock. We are going to move on to item D, the presentation regarding the future of fire and emergency medical services in the city. For the presentation, Karen Reed is going to be presenting this to us tonight. You may remember Karen or be familiar with Karen from our discussions on the DRCC over the last year and a half. Karen has extensive experience working with cities on fire service issues. She recently facilitated the discussions between the city of Arlington and North County Regional Fire Authority, in which Arlington was considering annexing, which was ultimately approved by the Arlington voters. Karen facilitated the negotiations also between the city of Linwood and Fire District 1, that led to the election to create South County Fire back in 2017. And more recently, Karen has facilitated initial discussions between the city of Everett and Snohomish County Fire District 4 in initial phases to consider joining the creation of a new regional fire authority. And she is also working with the city of Tukwila, which is exploring a range of options for the future of its fire department. We asked Karen to work with us to facilitate the dialogue between ourselves and South County when we headed down this path earlier this year. This is going to be a topic that, pardon the expression, our new council members are going to have a fire hose in their mouths as we get up to speed on these issues, but it's going to take up a lot of our time over the next couple months. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen for her presentation. And this is just a precursor to more informational. We'll have some questions, but leading to our discussion next week on whether to take the first step in the annexation process with South County. So with that, Karen, please take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'd like to thank Mike Todd for running my PowerPoint here. Good evening to all of you. As the Mayor said, I've been working with the city for the last several months on this issue. The presentation tonight is pretty dense. It's about 18 slides and it takes me about 30 minutes to get through it without questions. It is informational. We're not asking for any action tonight. We'll be coming back next week and shortly thereafter to talk with you further about the subject. We are in process here. We don't have all the answers, but we have a pretty good fix on the situation, and that's what we want to talk with you about this evening. Mike, if you could go to the next slide. There we go. Oh, there we go. Yeah, perfect. The city has chosen to provide fire service to its residents since incorporation through a contract with the fire district. And that fire district that has been the service provider is Snohomish Regional Fire and Rescue. We refer to them as SURFR. They changed their name recently after a series of mergers between themselves and other smaller fire districts. The city's current contract with SURFR ends at the end of 2022. And SURFR gave the city notice this past year that it is willing to continue to provide service to the city, but not at the extremely favorable cost terms that you now have. SURFR would like a more equitable contract in comparison to what its taxpayers are paying, or we'd also be happy to entertain annexation by the city into SURFR. I would say that there are no bad actors here, but the great deal that the city has had for a long time is ending, and a new path must be forged to ensure high quality service continues to be provided after the contract ends in 13 months. So given this picture, the city has been exploring its options. I would say most residents of Snohomish County today with full-time professional fire services are paying much more for that service than Mill Creek is today. Their cities have had to struggle in recent years with the same situation of rising fire and EMS costs. In the last decades, we've seen a lot of change in the fire service industry with a lot of, basically the trend has been for smaller agencies to merge or annex into larger agencies to secure economies of scale and sort of spread the cost of service over a broader tax base. So tonight we'll talk about where we are, what the options are, and what the staff team is recommending at this point is in terms of next steps. And Mayor, I will take questions as we go unless you would prefer otherwise.
That is fine.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Here we go. Thanks. Perfect. So currently we have a contract with SURFR. That's the city has been contracting with them since 1983. They provide a high quality of service to the city. There's no issue there. They serve mostly a suburban rural area. They have 8 fire stations covering that. It's about 100 square mile service area. The city of Mill Creek is Surfer's only contract city. This year, the city's paying them approximately $4.13 million for fire and EMS services. Next year will be about $4.34 million. These are pre-negotiated contract rates. This year, that's about 27% of the city's general fund, or the equivalent of a tax rate in Mill Creek of about 88 cents per thousand. The city's EMS levy covers about 40% of that cost. The city's EMS levy is also expiring at the end of 2022. Next slide, please. So looking at our options, there are some options, but all of them will cost considerably more. And the viable options in terms of cost and the ability to execute by the time January of 2023 rolls around are limited. Options that have been considered but are not considered viable include starting the city's own fire department. This, I'll just say a couple words about that. This really goes directly against the trend of regionalization given the cost. A one fire station operation is not terribly viable due to the reliance you would have on an excessive reliance on your neighbors to respond to virtually every call in the city. A regular house fire, not that that's a regular event, but a house fire would usually see the deployment of at least 15 firefighters. The city has it at their one fire station in Mill Creek, there are 5 firefighters on staff at any one time. We've looked at a high level at the cost of doing this. We don't believe it could be accomplished by next year. It's very difficult to attract firefighters these days. In some reasons, for the same reasons, it's difficult to hire police, but firefighters would need to be trained for about a year, and there would be significant startup costs for an operation ranging, depending on the depth of backup vehicles and improvements you made, anywhere from $2 to $8 million. And then the ongoing costs would be in the range of $6 to $8 million. And those estimates exclude the costs that other fire agencies would likely charge you because you really would not be able to be remotely self-sufficient. They also exclude reserves and overhead and insurance and licensing and things like that. But so that's just a swag. Contracting with Everett doesn't seem terribly viable at the moment, since they are very much focused on securing their own long-term fire service future. Bothell has indicated they are not interested. That leaves us with the 2 large fire service agencies that surround the city. To your east is Surfer, and they have expressed a willingness to either annex the city or enter into contract negotiations for a more equitable contract. Alternately, to your west is the Snohomish County Regional Fire Authority, known as South County Fire. They are willing to annex. They strongly prefer annexation, but would offer a short-term service contract in lieu of that. Next slide, please. This looks at a high level at the tax rates between those 2 most viable service providers, to the east and to the west. And you can see the bottom line is that Surfer's tax rates are significantly higher at this point going into 22 than are South County Fires. In part, this is because Snohomish Regional Fire and Rescue was just successful in securing voter approval in November for an increase in their fire levy to the maximum $1.50 rate. On an annual basis, the difference in these 2 tax rates in Mill Creek in 2022 is about $2 million. I want to make a note that you'll see in the cost column for South County Fire, there's something called a fire benefit charge. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about that. It's a fee that is collected on a different basis than property taxes. But if you take the total estimated collections and translate that into a property tax rate equivalent for apples to apples comparisons in Mill Creek, it's about a 16-cent levy for the total, contributing to the total $1.51 equivalent tax rate. Next slide, please. What the heck is a fire benefit charge? I'm just going to detour a little, since that is something unique to South County Fire. It's not a tax, it's a fee that is based on the fire needs of a particular structure. Basically, the more risk that if you had a fire in your structure, it would require a larger number of vehicles and personnel to respond, then you will pay a larger fire benefit fee, a fire benefit charge. So for example, a single family residential property will pay less than a large warehouse or commercial structure. and 2 single-family residential family homes that are identical in size and nature, even if they had very different property values, would pay the same amount. In order to impose a benefit charge, a fire agency has to cap its maximum fire levy rate at $1 instead of the regular $1.50. You have to go to the voters to get it initially imposed, and you have to go back to the voters after 6 years for reauthorization. The South County Fire just got this approved by their voters in, I believe it's 2020. And the total collections are set each year by the board, and they cannot exceed 60% of the agency's budget. South County is the only agency in Snohomish County that has a fire benefit charge. Why is that? Primarily because it's the most urbanized part of the county, perhaps with the exception of Everett. And benefit charges make more sense in a more highly developed urban environment because you have a larger variability in the nature of the structures that you're protecting. It's not all just one-story barns or single-family residence. It's multi-story buildings, industrial facilities. Next slide, please. So, question you might have, well, are those tax rates we looked at, are those typical? And the answer is yes, they are pretty typical. In Washington State, you're going to see in an urban area for a professional full-time fire service, you're going to see tax rates of in the range of $1.35 to $2 per thousand of AV. South County Fire's rates are at the low end of that at $1.51. Again, we are seeing a lot of regionalization statewide and locally because of the cost of fire service. And at this point, only the cities of Everett and Mukilteo still operate their own fire departments. Everyone else has a pretty old fire service contract or has more recently decided to annex into a fire agency. A quick note about the differences between a fire district, which Surfer is a fire district, and South County Fire is a regional fire authority. Those 2 different types of municipal governments have essentially the same taxing power. RFAs have a lot more flexibility in setting up their governance board, which has made it more attractive when you're trying to bring disparate agencies, cities, and fire districts, or even just several cities together. They can structure a solution to governance that works for them. And there are 2 RFAs in Snohomish County, South County Fire that we're talking about here this evening, and North County RFA, which recently annexed Arlington and the city of Stanwood as well. Next slide, please. A couple of just comparative facts about the 2 agencies. South County Fire serving a larger population, much smaller service area. Ooh, I was wrong, it's 140 square miles. That's much bigger than the 100 I mentioned earlier. 14 fire stations versus 11, more staff on duty in South County Fire, as you'd expect with more fire stations. They're different corporate structures with regional fire authority versus a fire district. They have different governance boards, and they have the different tax rates down there. Next slide, please. Both of these agencies provide very high quality services. Because South County has a more high value urban tax base, it is easier for it to keep tax rates lower and still provide really high quality services. Again, the development patterns in the 2 agencies is pretty different. South County Fire has the benefit charge, which often is described as a more equitable approach to funding because it is based on the cost of delivering service as opposed to how much your house is worth. South County Fire does offer some specialized urban programs, including a community paramedic program, which is a really cost-effective way to deal with people that tend to call 911 a lot, but don't actually need medical care. It also has robust public education and fire prevention programs.
Karen?
Yes, I
Do you
can't
think-
see any of you, but if I'm ignoring
Apologies.
questions, I apologize.
Councilmember Cavallari.
Thank you, Mayor. So what you just mentioned about the community paramedic, among other options, I guess we will call it, that the fire district offers, are those additional in cost or do they come with the tax rate?
They would be included with the tax rate for annexation. It's a good question because there are the one thing that would not be included in terms of a service were the city to annex would be the fire marshal's office service. What you usually see when cities annex is they have that fire marshal responsibility. They retain that, they decide the level of service they want, high, medium, low, whatever. They work that out on an a la carte basis with their service provider. The paramedic program is just an included offering.
Thank you.
Sure. The next slide, please. This is a map. There you see Mill Creek in the middle with 76 is the station 76. The red shaded area around the city is its urban annexation growth area. To the west, you see the South County Fire Territory. They are currently serving the western portion of your urban growth area. And you can see several stations within striking distance, 22 to the south, 21 in the middle, 11, 7, 12. Then actually 7 is not their station. Then to the east, Surfers Territory, they're serving the eastern portion of your urban growth area. You can see they are currently operate stations at a station 76. They also operate 72, 77, 71, and 13. So both of these agencies have a lot of fire stations nearby. And both of them are very used to serving and responding to calls in Mill Creek because, of course, the automatic aid system dispatches the closest available unit. And that at any time or any incident could be someone from either the Surfer or South County Fire. Next slide, please. So having looked at the options, the staff does think the city should pursue the annexation path. We're not asking for any action on that tonight. The council may choose a different path. There are some more issues to explore and some issues to resolve, but we do believe that this is the most viable option in terms of ensuring continued high service quality delivery at the most cost-effective price. The annexation would move people directly to long-term stability in terms of their service delivery. The city is no longer the middleman. The service provider, the fire agency, is directly accountable to the voters. And once you're out of the contract business, you are also out of the challenge of facing situations like this where you hit the end of your contract and you have some significant changes in the pricing that you have to come to grips with. We talked about service quality earlier. Currently Surfer staffs Station 76 with 5 folks on a shift. South County Fire is willing to continue that. We talked about both agencies routinely responding to calls in the city. South County Fire is definitely interested in annexing Mill Creek. The cost is substantially lower than Surfer. South County Fire is not willing to enter into a long-term service contract because it's trying to get its remaining contract cities that it's had for a very long time out of the contract business in the first place to try to move to a parity situation with all of its residents and businesses that it serves, just as Surfer has indicated its interest in that regard as well. Next slide, please. How is annexation different than a contract for service? In brief, the cost is essentially the same. It's just a question of whether the taxpayers are paying you, the city, and then you turn around and pay the service provider, or whether the taxpayers are paying the service provider directly. As a city council, you can enter into a service contract without going to the voters. Annexation, however, requires voter approval. And in this case, it would be a simple majority of voters in Mill Creek. No one else, just the Mill Creek voters would have to decide on whether they would like to see the city annex. So if you annex instead of paying the city as part of your city tax bill, property owners would pay South County directly. The South County Fire Governance Board and the city must reach agreement on the annexation proposal in order for it to advance. The city is responsible for placing the measure on the ballot. If annexation is approved, the cost of fire service comes off the city's budget in 2023. The city's EMS levy is replaced by the South County Fire EMS levy, and then the South County Fire levy and benefit charges would also be added in Mill Creek beginning in 2023. Unfortunately, because of the way the tax laws in the state work, there's a sort of an aggressive calendar for making this happen seamlessly by January of 2023. And most specifically, you would need to secure voter approval for this in the April 26, 2022 special election in order for the South County taxes to be able to be imposed in the city starting in January 2023. And if we can't meet that timeline, we have to find another way to pay for fire service in 2023. Next slide, please. So this is a very high level comparison of how the costs of the options compare. Right now, you will in 2022 pay about 4.3 million to Surfer. The estimated parity cost with South County Fire. So if you were paying either a contract at the same tax rates as their taxpayers are paying, or city taxpayers were paying that rate, it would be about 7.5 million. And if you were with Surfer in a parity contract, it'd be about 9.4 million. So that's a significant difference, which is one of the reasons we've been engaged in these dialogue with South County Fire. One of the key issues is the fire station. Typically, cities transfer their fire assets. Most cities have had a fire department, and then they join a larger fire agency. They send the assets over to the new service provider, but the city only has a partial interest in Station 76. So the fate of that station, who owns it, how is it maintained going forward? That's an issue that is under discussion. Another issue that we mentioned before is the level of fire marshal services. That would be a retained cost not covered by annexation that you need to be negotiating with South County Fire. Again, the cost is considerably higher than that which we are able to pay in the Surfer contract now, but it looks like it's going to be considerably less than an parity cost of annexation to Surfer going forward. Next slide, please. This is a calendar to sort of recap some of those dates I was mentioning. Here we are in November. When we come back to see you next week, we're going to ask to adopt a resolution that would have a formal start to the annexation process, even though we've been in discussion for a while. This is just one of those check the box things in the statute that we need to do. We are in the process of engaging a public outreach firm that can help us communicate about the pros and the cons and the facts as we move forward. We will be needing to complete negotiations with South County Fire in the next couple of months. We will brief you on an ongoing basis. In December and through early February, the council will need to decide how it wants to adjust its spending if annexation is approved or rejected. I'll talk about that in a bit. And the accompanying interlocal agreements and documents must be approved by early February, and the council resolution placing annexation on the ballot needs to go over to the elections department by February 25. From there, the annexation schedule, as we do public outreach and talk to them again about the pros and cons of this, just the facts, ma'am. What are we looking at? Why are we looking at it? What does it mean for them? Annexation is on April 26th. Annexation is effective August 1st in order that the new taxes could begin in January. I will note that that means that technically the fire service provider on August 1st becomes South County Fire, but they don't have any revenue yet. So the payment for fire service in the last 5 months of 2022 will remain a city responsibility even if annexation occurs. So basically that we have to negotiate the terms of that. What usually happens is that annexing cities transmit the remainder of their fire budget to their new service provider. Next slide, please.
Karen, before you move off that slide.
Yes, sir.
On number one, just so we're all clear, that is required by state statute. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it does not in any way say, I promise I'm putting this on the ballot, we're going to reach agreement. It's a process step that there's something on paper that both parties can point to. Yes, we want to be in this dialogue. Later decisions and actions by the council are necessary to actually move forward beyond this point.
Yeah, and that's the action that we'll be discussing next week. But just to be clear, if we decide to move forward with that resolution, it's not moving forward to the annexation. That's just the step we have to take under state law to continue the process.
That's exactly right. Thank you. Yes. So some things to consider. If annexation is approved, that will cost collectively city property tax owners, property tax payers about $3 million more in 2023 than they were paying in 2022. If the city makes no reductions in its levy rate it will have about $2.6 million freed up in revenue. And so a discussion should be had about, is some or all of that going to be returned to the voters by rolling back your city general levy, or does some or all of that better applied to enhance existing services? And that's an important discussion for the city. The question of will also come up, can you even make this revenue neutral? That would require cutting your budget by an additional $3 million beyond zeroing out the cost of your current contract. And that additional $3 million would be the equivalent of roughly, it's more than 2 years worth of the Public Works Department operation. It's equivalent to about half of the police department budget in a year. So that's a very heavy lift. I don't think you could do that without impacting services for in the long haul. You might find one-time revenue, but it would be right back in your face the following year. So that's an important and challenging discussion. If the voters reject annexation in April, we would only be proceeding if there was a backup service contract in place. And what has been offered thus far by South County Fire is a 1-year contract with a 1-year extension, conditioned on again asking the voters in 2023. After that, we'd be looking at a renegotiation. Again, the city's EMS levy will be gone in 2023. That currently funds 40% of your bill. All in all, you will need to find an estimated 7.4 million or so to pay for a service contract in 2023, assuming we end up at sort of a parity level with South County Fire. And that's a lot of funding that would require either new revenues, spending reserves, spending one-time monies, major budget cuts, or some combination thereof. Next slide, please. So the net impact on property owners in the city depends largely on what the city decides to do after it no longer needs to fund the fire and EMS contract. So again, it will be really important to specify what your plan is for the voters. If you're going to keep some of that freed up money, ideally you would want to be able to tell the voters how much you plan to keep and what it would be spent on. If you plan to mitigate the cost impact, you should explain that and what the plan for that is. Next slide, please. Similarly, you will need to consider before we get out there and make the decision to go to the ballot, what will you do if the voters say no? And again, you have a few options. You could ask the voters. So after April failed, you could, if you failed in April, you could go back to the voters in August and or November and ask them to restore the city's EMS levy so that it would continue into 2023. That alone would not be sufficient to cover contract costs. So you'd be looking at other either cuts elsewhere, spending of one-time monies, or an additional increase, probably in the vicinity. It depends on how much you decide you want to rely on the property tax. You might need a second vote to increase the property tax levy. Alternately, you could look to councilmanically imposed utility taxes at some level. You could spend down reserves again, but that buys you 1 year because you can only spend those one-time reserves once. You could use some COVID funds, some of the federal funding, we believe that's also one-time money. And you could also look at cutting or eliminating other city services.
Karen, can we clarify that utility tax issue? My understanding, we don't have one, and my understanding is the first time a jurisdiction adopts it, it has to be approved by the voters. Is that correct?
I will need to defer to Grant on that because the statutes have changed since the last time I was dealing with utility taxes.
That's correct, Mayor.
So that's an election no matter what, if you're looking at new revenues. Okay. Then, so if there are no questions further, I'm going to just move to my very last slide. Thank you, Mike. That there has been a great deal in place for a number of years. It is ending. Any option going forward is going to be a lot more expensive, but frankly, more in line with what other residents in Snohomish County are paying today and have been paying for a while. Of the few options we think that are viable, the recommendation from the staff team is to seek voter approval to annex Mill Creek into South County Fire. We have a ways to go before we know that, the four corners of that agreement, but we're working on that. We do believe that South County Fire annexation would continue high quality fire service to the city, including some additional programs not available. But in order to have that replacement service and funding in place, we need to go to the voters in April 2020 to either for annexation, and if that is unsuccessful, we may need to be back at them talking about new tax votes. We need to look in the next 2 to 3 months about what the plan would be if annexation is successful, how you would reduce or reallocate funds that are no longer needed in the city's budget to pay for fire, or what would happen if annexation vote fails, how you would fund that service. And the next step, as the mayor mentioned just a couple moments ago, is to adopt a resolution which formally adopts the annexation process, but does not commit the city to placing anything on the ballot. And that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Councilmember Steckler.
Hi, Karen. Thank you. Just a point of clarification I wanted to double check. In the presentation, you mentioned how South Snohomish would take over our fire building here in the city of Mill Creek. But if we do go with South Snohomish, have they agreed to go ahead and run the fire department out of our fire building within the city of Mill Creek, or would we be looking at moving our fire building outside of the city of Mill Creek? I just want to make sure that's clear.
Definitely the plan, if the city either contracts with South County Fire or annexes into South County Fire, they would want to operate out of the existing Station 76.
Great, thank you.
And just to be clear, it's not our station. We have an equity interest and a right to buy it on favorable terms, but
Right.
it belongs to the fire district. Surfer. Is that it, John?
Oh, yes, yes.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Councilmember Cavallari.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Karen. Thanks for a great presentation. As usual, you hit the nail on the head. You're very informative, I think. I really appreciate that about you. One of the concerns I've had a couple of residents state, and I know this might sound like a housekeeping issue, but they were worried about personnel in Station 76. They were worried about the potential of firefighters or paramedics being laid off or not having work. I think one of the things we're looking for is to make sure that everybody that's been serving here one way is still going to remain a firefighter within somewhere in Snohomish County, somewhere in the mix, and the level of service won't change too. So can you tell us where we're at in discussion on that, please?
Yes, I can't get too far ahead of my skis since the city doesn't employ any of these folks, but it's my understanding from talking with the South County Fire folks that the unions have been talking together, and South County Fire at least has shared with us their strong commitment to ensure that there is no negative impact or there's no loss of firefighter jobs as a result of any transition here.
Thank you.
And I'll jump ahead to what I was going to talk about in my report just briefly. After our council meeting last week, I did reach out to Chief Hovis on Wednesday morning just to touch base and say that Michael's decision to leave didn't affect our discussions with South County and that those will proceed. And then I pinch hit for Councilmember Bond on the fire board. We had a meeting with a few of the commissioners that afternoon, which I thought was very productive. And then finally, Karen alluded to the consultant. We'll be working with Liz Loomis, a former mayor of Snohomish, who by avocation now she works with jurisdictions on passing these revenue measures. So she would be the person that we contract with and work with to help us communicate the message to the community and the information to the community. And then finally, we've already started talking with staff about in December, working to put together some of these options on how we might adjust our levy rate and what that might mean so that we can better paint for the voters the picture of what the package would look like. So we're still negotiating the South County side of it, but to get some information so we can have discussions in later December, more likely early January on what we might do on our end so we can put that picture together. Any questions? Councilmember Duque, I can't see you on the screen. Did you have anything you wanted to ask?
No, Mayor.
Hearing none. Thank you, Karen. Appreciate it. And so we will be back with you, I imagine, next week at our special meeting.
We'll be back. And
Okay.
my thanks to the staff team and Grant Deginger for all their help on this effort. Thank you.
It's a complicated issue. It's hard enough for us, I think, to wrap our heads around. So we got to make sure we help the voters understand the choices we have to make. We'll now move to our study session, which is on the proposed budget amendments for this year. So I'm not sure if I'm turning over to Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, the next presentation will be by our Laurel Gimzo, our finance director. A few things to mention. Council last week received the packets regarding the financial baseline budget information for up to Q3. This is going to be somewhat of a shortened version presentation that will highlight a few things. Budget adjustments, amendment proposals across our general and proprietary funds, along with some key dates and kind of some deadlines that she will mention. Also presented will be an overview of our tax levy options and visual scenarios relating to the property and EMS levies that we will adopt later in this session. So I'll hand it over to our finance director, Laurel Gimzo. Thank you.
All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I just wanted to go over the updated schedule because this has been moving a bit. So tonight we do have to go over the proposed budget and the CIP amendments, and then we will need to approve the property tax levy and EMS levy because the deadline is November 30th, end of day for the county. So with that, I am going to make sure this up. So with tonight's review, I do want to note that going into this, I want to stay as high level as possible with the full agenda. So if there are specific concerns, questions that are not needed for the levy decision, please feel free to call or email me this week or next week, and I can walk through anything that's needed. I want everyone to remember that ARPA funding is not included in this presentation, but it will be added in the final amendment. And this was just done to assist with spotting trends. The main direction I need from council tonight is how to handle transfers as it's related to a policy decision. With fire services, we do have a large budget change that's coming after the end of this biennium. So that could impact how council feels about the reserve levels that we keep. We will need to set the levies tonight. Any budget decisions made at this meeting will be put in place before the hearing on December 7th. And then that will also go into the final budget on the 14th when we adopt. So if we do have until December 31st to adopt the budget. So as you can see, for our amended revenues, we did have taxes. You can kind of see the screen is almost split in half. You can see that taxes were really coming in a lot better this year than projected. But then because of COVID, we did have our charges for service that were dramatically lower. So when the budget was originally adopted, they did note that revenue projections assumed that services were resuming at normal levels, and we have not been able to do that. We have been pushing to restart the recreation revenues, but with COVID, we have had some complications. We've had some refunds that have had to go out. So that is something to remember, that while we are really trying to start bringing in that additional revenue, there's just so much you can do with COVID. So as we move into the expenses, I would say the biggest adjustments are related to salaries and benefits, legal costs, professional services, and then this last piece is the sales tax transfer. So this is something that hasn't been budgeted in the last couple of years, and that is something that does fund your capital improvement plan fund. And so we will get into that a little bit deeper here in a minute. Okay, and so then I just wanted to run through these so that you could glance at them. Most of these are just taking the legal out of your legislative budget, your city manager, other than the city attorney. We've got decreases in finance related to legal, communications and marketing, it was legal, publication costs were lower, and then salaries. So in IT, we did have some unbudgeted health benefits, some software licensing that hadn't been budgeted at the levels that were needed. And then we did have some expansion that data expansion that we needed for people to work from home. So we did have a COVID expense there. With HR, that is the large one. So that is where everything has been, all of the decreases have been added into HR. So that is where anything that has to do with staff in general has been placed in the HR. So that's union negotiations, any kind of advice, any kind of litigation, that's where we're placing HR. And we are working on getting that separated so that there will be individual lines for advice and some for litigation. The goal is to have that done for the 22 budget. As far as the clerk's budget goes, that is going to be any kind of legal costs that's related to open records. So any kind of legal review and assistance with those open record requests. And then we do have a lot happening on the fire budget. So we did have a fairly large increase here just because we needed assistance. So you've got professional services and legal for the fire contract. Okay, so as we move, we did have insurance increases that there's just no way to avoid them. We did adjust memberships and organization
Hold on one sec.
assessments.
There's a question from Councilmember.
I'm sorry,
Stefan.
Laurel, I had a question. If you go back one slide on legal.
Yes.
I know when we talked last week, we were going to take these legal costs out of the departments and make them their own separate line items so that we could see how they compared against budgets. So I see these increases plus 938 plus 283. Are these increases over and above budget? How do they compare against what we had budgeted for each of these legal costs?
So this is just the overall fund change. So this is just your overall budget change. And there was a slide with the legal comparison down in the expense section of the packet that was provided.
There was.
And we can.
Laurel, could you provide clarification on what we budgeted for in legal expenses in this biennium? I mean, so for instance, I don't recall that we budget for unanticipated litigation that we don't know about at the time we're adopting the budget. Is that correct?
Yes. So we did budget around $1.2 million for legal overall. And
So what would that encompass?
So that would encompass all legal. So originally they had been putting all legal in a single line. And that was something that was different from previous years. That was a decision that was made before I was here. And so I think it was mainly because they were wanting to see just how much was spent on legal. And that is something that you can break out. It is more clear when you can see what the legal is for, which is why we were breaking it into the different departments.
Yeah, I think that's the easy part of the equation is figuring out what we spent it on. The reason why I bring this up is we keep referring to how much over budget we are. And I'm not sure we have enough information on what we actually budget for legal expenses besides the base legal expenses of a city attorney that we anticipate in the course of the year. I don't think we budget for unanticipated litigation, which we've seen presentations as a big driver of the legal costs. So I'm not questioning looking at where we spend it. I don't think we have enough information to all understand what we budget and don't budget for.
So,
and actually, Laurel, if I could add to that, I made copies of the packet you gave us and I could not find a page that had anything on the legal items budget. And I just went through every page. I still can't find it. Maybe you give me a header or something that I should be looking for, but I cannot find a page that leads. What I'm looking for is legal expenses budgeted by line item or total, and what actually has been spent and what was budgeted? And where are we now? Are we over, under?
So we are over. I
How much over are we?
believe it is page.
Unfortunately, I printed them. I didn't get page numbers, but if you give me a header.
It says legal breakdown. It is on, it's numbered page 16. So you have the legal expenses. It is by department. It has your 2017 and 2018 actuals.
And what's the header on it? I'm sorry, the header?
Legal breakdown. So we're roughly, we're budgeting roughly 882,000 over what was originally budgeted. I will note that legal costs were a bit over $2 million in 2019 and 2020. And then in this biennium, we did budget less than half of that. So we were only budgeting 1.2. I feel like I need to just bring this up. Let me pull the slide up.
I think we may be missing that page. I only see 14 pages.
Yeah, I don't got it.
You only have 14 pages?
Yeah.
No,
I
I'm
have it.
looking at it online. It's page,
Are we looking at the wrong thing?
there's,
There it
I
is.
just found it. It's legal breakdown.
I
I have it
didn't
as
get-
well.
When I printed it, I didn't get that
Got it.
from your email. I'm sorry, I printed it from the email she sent us.
I don't think I emailed this.
Okay,
So
that's
it's
why.
just
I took it from
in-
the email packet you sent me, us.
So, yeah, so that was just,
Okay.
like your quarterly
So
report.
this is the legal breakdown.
Yes,
Just take me a second here. All right, we had budgeted 1.2. We're 882,000 over year to date.
no, this is the budget overall. So this is where if expenses decrease a bit, but they do continue at least the majority, I would say we were planning on, from current situations, we are looking at legal decreasing this next year, but I did go ahead and budget where we were thinking we would need funding. So while next year's legal will be lower than this year, I just went ahead and this is just the overall budget change for this biennium. Because
So
this
the-
is what we're projecting, what I'm projecting that we will need.
So the biennium budget is 2086. That's what you, no, pardon me. The biennium budget was 1.2 million, correct? For 2 years.
Correct. Yes.
We were going to spend 1.2 million over 2 years. And you're proposing to increase that to 2086, which is an $882,000 increase.
Correct. Because I will note,
I
I'm
thought we
not
spent over
entirely
$1 million
sure
a year.
where the 1.2 million came from. I would not have budgeted at that level if it was me previously. But I mean, there are a lot of things that have been going on, so it would have been hard to know just exactly where we needed to land because it's really hard to plan for litigation and the different situations that we have to cover. And we would have been under budget or under 2019, 2020, but with fire and everything going on there, that has pushed us over a bit. And we may come in a little bit under, I mean, we may come in under a bit. It just depends. And if we don't need this much, we don't have to spend it. But from projections, this is where it looks like we're going to be landing. And then I will say in 2023, it does look like this is going to dramatically decrease. So I will say with that 1.2 number that was previously budgeted, I think that would be appropriate for the 2023 budget. I just do not see that being realistic for our current biennium.
So dramatically in 2023.
because I do believe we should have quite a bit wrapped up and handled. And we will have collective bargaining that's finished as well. So that will be going away also.
I feel
We
like
have a lot of stuff in the air right now.
I feel like my puppy chasing its tail, and I don't think we have all the information to wrap up this discussion because we don't understand what's in that $998,000 that we budgeted for. And I don't have an understanding of what then is going into the 403,000 for 22 into 22 and the 1.13 million. So I would suggest that if we could get a little more detail on what the assumptions were of what those costs were, then I think we can better have a more informed discussion of where we truly were over budget and why things are dropping. But I don't think we have that information
So
yet.
at this point in time, all of your invoices have been split based on where the topic has been. So if it's human resource related, that's going to be any kind of union negotiation, any kind of advice, any kind of litigation. That is what's going into your human resources. So any kind of legal that is related to staff and negotiations, advice, litigation, that's all going into your HR. Your city clerk increase, that's going to be related to legal costs in legal review for those open records.
Public
And then
disclosure.
police, you have their different contracts and any kind of legal advice that they're getting. So as we've split these invoices, pieces of them go to each department. And at this point in time, if we continue at the rate we're at, and we do project that in the next year, our legal service needs are going to be decreasing, this is where we're going to land. So like community development needs legal review for their different projects. So that's where they're going to need an increase. Well, actually, they don't need an increase because they're good. Public Works, community development, we're good there. But like the fire contract, there's $100,000 increase because we will have legal fees related to the fire contract, fire services, and that's where that increase is coming from. I don't know if that's, so like IT had not budgeted for legal services, and we did have legal assistance for the website. And so that is where that $2,349 increase is coming from. Well, the amended budget, because that's what we need. And so that covers, and then that flows into the increase of $2,222. Communications and marketing, they haven't needed legal services, and so we decreased that line. Well, also the legal services that they would have needed usually would have been related to HR. So that's where that got put into the HR bucket. So that's where a lot of these legal fees were split out into the different departments and in this last budget. But previously, the majority of them were in the city manager's budget. And so that's where we've taken out everything, but what we're projecting would be city attorney related fees. And so we left that in there, and then we took everything else and we stuck it in HR. I don't know if that's more clear.
0.2 million been spent year to date.
It's the budget.
I know it says budget, but I'm just curious. Has that been spent year to date? What has been spent year to date? Do we know?
I will have to pull that up.
It's based on the mayor's question. If all the HR and labor negotiations are out, what is in the 403 that's in the city manager number?
That is the city attorney related legal. So anything the city attorney reviews or assists with any kind of, so like he's at the meeting tonight, anything that you would typically need the city attorney for, that is where that expense would fall.
I think there's one piece of pending litigation that the prior city manager included in his budget when we adopted it in 21-22, that with this amendment, they're proposing to allocate the attorney fees more consistent with the department where they're arising.
Correct.
So that explains part of that increase of the 1.2. My assumption, and I don't know if we have information about this, is that the other part of the increase reflects other litigation that may not have existed when we did the budget, but we've had to
Yes.
incur costs for that litigation since the budget was adopted. So now we've got to amend the budget to cover those additional costs. The 307 for the city clerk, and maybe I'll ask for either Laurel or the city attorney to provide clarification. Am I correct to assume that that's really the legal cost that we did not anticipate from the myriad of public records requests that require attorney review to make sure there's nothing privileged or confidential or exempt from review that gets released?
Yes, in part that is correct. There's a public records lawsuit that has been brought, that's underway. I guess that I also double checked to see under the city manager number. I believe that also includes the prosecutor's contract as well, doesn't it, Laurel?
And it would,
In public defense and
in the public defense?
Yeah, so I believe that there's some additional costs there that go beyond just simply the city attorney work. Believe me, it's not been that much in that sense. So I do believe that there's several other contracts that includes that are several $100,000.
So at this point in time, we have spent to date, as of October, we have basically 1.1 million, a hint over. So that's where we still have November and December to go. And we are projecting that they will be decreasing next year. But I would not be comfortable going less than the recommended 2,086,000. I mean, we can do it, but we may need another amendment depending on
Of the numbers, I think we're trying to understand what the increases are. And I mean, it looks like with the budget amendment you're contemplating, we're looking at allocating another 800 grand to legal fees. Just looking at the numbers, 400 of that comes from public records requests in the fire contract.
Yes.
So half of the increase is from those two line items. So the question then becomes, is it that I think we need to have answered, not necessarily tonight, but at the next time we meet, is what's that other 400,000 primarily coming from?
Well, the other point this brings up to me was I remember when we set this 21-22 budget, we set it on the heels of the astronomical increases in legal costs happened in 19 and 20. And we said we wanted to get control of our legal costs, and we made a big deal out of it. And we set that budget with the plan to watch our legal expenses. And obviously, it didn't work. So I think the number that Laurel's given us is correct. It's probably very likely 2086, and we'll be lucky if we get through with that by the end of 2022. But the reality is we've got to come up with a plan to control our legal expenses, because they, for the last 4 years now, have just really skyrocketed.
I don't disagree, but my point that I'll continue making is a lot of that has to do with factors out of our control that we don't budget for. Public records requests and litigation, those are the big drivers of these costs.
Well, I think there are other factors that we could control that we should examine and look at ways to bring these costs down.
I don't disagree.
We said we did. We said we were going to. We set a budget. We didn't do it.
So what information would you like to see?
I'd like to see a plan, but
No, but in
we talk
terms
about
of the
that later. Right
numbers,
now, I think Laurel is correct in her number. I was challenging it, but I am now correct. We need to add $882,000. That's a legitimate add-on. And it's too bad. But it's a reality, so we got to move on.
All right, anyone have any other questions, comments on legal? Okay. So from here, I'm going to address the next larger issue. So we're coming off of expenses here. So I just want to touch base on this $1.1 million down over revenues here in the far right. So so this is going to be one of the larger decisions we need made before the budget is finalized, before this open hearing on the 7th. So our budget policies are that one-time revenues should be used for one-time only non-reoccurring expenditures. I will note that with COVID in the last budget, this was something that it was decided that that was not going to happen because revenues were coming in lower. And I will say that's completely acceptable. With this budget, we are looking at a similar issue. So I just wanted to look at what our different transfers had been originally planned at. So something to remember is that this is not something we have to do. We do have a very large question mark right now with our fire contract. So depending on what happens, we may need larger than normal reserve levels. So in one of the other budget presentations we had gone over, I had recommended only the $20,000 transfer and only the $1.1 million transfer for construction sales tax, and then the general fund to the municipal arts for qualified capital projects. So ARPA can be used for capital projects if there is a direct benefit to citizens, is one option. So these are where these numbers are coming from. We have construction sales tax. We had in 19, you can see in 2020, they went up. In 2021, they weren't quite as high as 2020. And then we are projecting them to go down in 2022. We did have transfers planned originally in this CIP. And so these were transfers that were planned previously that would have gone into fund these capital projects. So with that, something to remember is that while we can do, I do not think we should do all of these, mainly because our fund balance cannot handle it. Because we need to have at least $4.6 million. If we have, so your 15% revenue, of 15% of your revenues should be left in reserves. So this $4.6 million number is with a 0% property tax increase for this next biennium, or not biennium, but for this next year, for this biennium. And then it is including a 1% EMS. Something to think about is that there are other options if we do not want to do this transfer to the CIP, because the CIP currently is funded for this biennium. But once we start looking toward our wish list, these bigger projects here in like 5 to 10 years, we will have issues if we do not make these transfers, if we keep leaving this money in the general fund. I will say something to consider is thinking about, we could look at the next biennium and say, we're going to wait and see how things shake out with COVID. And from there, we can either do this transfer at the end of the year, or we can say we're going to include it in the next biennium and we don't want to put this in our budget amendment yet. So as we work through the capital plan here in a minute, I'll go over this a little bit more, but something I do need to know is what we want to do, or if we want to do the transfer for our sales tax that is related to construction to fund our capital projects. So this is a policy decision. So this is not something I felt comfortable just saying this is what we're going to do. I did include it in the amendment, but this is something that council can say, yes, we want to do all of it. We want to not do it right now because we feel like ARPA can cover a capital project in the future, or ARPA could cover this amount, or we can just say we're not going to do the transfer right now and we're going to do it in the next biennium, and we're just going to make sure to include it in the next biennium if revenues come in where we want, or if the fire contract works out in our favor. So that's just something to think about, but this is one decision I would like to have tonight.
From your comments that if we decide to move some of this, we can't unring the bell.
Correct. That is the one thing. It is much harder to try to get funding back into the general fund than it is to take from the general fund and put in the capital fund. So that is why I would say waiting is an option. So if we wanted to decide, like if you wanted, you could just say, depending on what happens, we are going to earmark this funding and say, we're going to use this in the next year if, we don't need our reserve for the fire contract. So just something to think about.
The downside of waiting.
Yes. Okay. So from here, I am going to jump into the.
Laurel, before you move on, Councilmember Steck, did you have a question? Did you like come back on?
I did. I did have a question for you. Laurel, I kind of hear what you're saying. The capital improvement fund doesn't need, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't need the funding right now, correct?
Correct. So at this point in time, we are comfortable. REIT has come in well.
Yeah.
We're doing okay.
We're behind on projects, so we're not exactly in need of the funding right now.
Exactly.
I think if anything, it would make total sense to hold back. We don't have to make the decision now. We can make it later. Capital fund's in great shape. I agree with Laurel. I don't see a need to do this yet, and we can do it definitely at the end of the next biennium.
We should, and her point of raising it was the fact policies call for us to make these transfers, and we haven't made it the last two bienniums. So it's up to us to wait. But she's just making us aware that that's not what our adopted policy calls for us to do. But when we adopted the policy that several years ago, that was before COVID.
And we don't know what's going to be happening here in the next 12 months.
Correct.
A lot of changes on the horizon. So I see it's a very good point. Thank you for bringing it up.
Okay. So I'm going to hop into the capital improvement plan. So my notes, I think Steckler pretty much took this. The capital plan, these changes should not be your main focus because they're not very large. We're not worried about this biennium or the next biennium. So we do, as we look toward the future, there are projects that are not funded that will need additional revenues to implement. So like when we look at our wish list, like the DRCC, the eGov Spine Road project, the Public Works Yard, these are all examples of projects that are partially funded. So we have $50,000 in the current CIP plan for the Public Works Yard engineering study, but then you're talking millions of dollars to really complete that project. And then with DRCC, with this amendment, we will have $240,000 to really get this up and running, get it started. But then this funding is only a piece of these projects. So right now, this is not something we need to be in crisis mode over, but here in 5, 10, 15 years, we may say, hey, we really want these projects. These were on our wish list, but if we continue to put off these transfers, we're not going to have the money to do these projects. We're going to have to take out bonds. We're going to have to implement a utility tax. We're going to have to find a way to pay these things. But my main focus was just right now in this amendment, that is not the main concern. Okay, so then, I mean, here we just have the one, we're having an addition to the ADA project. We're adding a library floor. We're getting rid of the historical preservation project because it wasn't $25,000. That did end up coming out of the municipal arts fund itself. And then we did remove the EOC project because it does need further research. Okay. So then when we move into the capital improvement fund that's specifically for parks and different open space, this is where your DRCC is going to be sitting. So we did go ahead and add 200,000 just for the needs analysis, any kind of preliminary master plan work we need for this project. And then I did want to throw up here the Silvercrest Park rehab. We're not changing the amount on this project, but we are changing the funding. So we did get a couple grants, and so those will be taking and replacing that REIT funding. Okay, and then our last.
I'm sorry, Laurel, are those grants, are those going to make it to the end of the year? Is the Snohomish County grant still viable after the end of this year and the state grant?
We should, I believe.
They're both good through 2022.
Yes, thank you.
Both through 2022. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I will say something. I'm just going to jump in here. This is likely where an additional project would fall. We do have, I believe it's 150,000 that we do need to decide on for another county grant. And so this is going to be the fund more than likely that will fall into. So that is another decision we will need to make tonight. So I'm going to need direction on the transfer, and then I'm going to need direction on if we want to put the $150,000 grant, what we want to put that toward. So I'm just going to hit this last one. So then
Before you move on to that, and Councilmember Cavalier is going to have a comment. I know what it is, but my understanding is we didn't have to identify that project until the end of the year for that additional money that may be available to us from the county.
I may have missed some direction. I just thought we were adding it to this amendment. I think Mike Todd has some information.
Yeah, I think we're in this a loop between our council and the county council. I think Councilmember Mead offered potentially we might get $150,000. We thank him very much for that offer. I think he put in a placeholder as the county was working on their budget. But what happens is with these county agreements, it has to be a project that's in our capital plan, and it has to fit in their budget and their capital plan. So last year, what they made us do was identify a project. For last year's money, it was the Silvercrest Park rehab project. So I think the same thing may happen, but Councilmember Mead has yet to get back to us because I think he's waiting for direction from his support staff at the county on how to deal with this. But I think that's why Laurel is saying we're going to have to put something in our CIP because otherwise we can't accept that money because one of their conditions is it has to be in our CIP. So we got this weird thing going on. So her comment was we need to decide tonight. I don't think we need to decide specifically what it is on tonight. She's just warning us that between now and a couple of weeks from now, we have to figure this out, and it's contingent on what the county council will give us instructions to do. That makes sense.
Yes, it does. That's the clarification I was looking at before we get bogged down in deciding which project to decide upon tonight. We don't have to decide that tonight. Councilmember Cavalieri.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. That is clarification I was looking for. And so if we did want to add something to the CIP, or if we had a little pet project, since there is money available, when would be the deadline to add that to the CIP?
We have the public hearing on the 7th. So, but our final budget, in theory, on the schedule would be adopted on December 14th. It would be, as long as we noted in the public hearing that maybe there was an additional 150,000, I can just throw a $150,000 placeholder. That would give us an additional week. December 7th would be great, but preferably by December 14th at the latest, because that's when we had planned on adopting. I feel like there's a slide here just because the budget can, in theory, be pushed off to December 31st, but with the holidays, I do think that if we could get it by the 7th or at the 14th at the absolute latest, that would be ideal.
And how far in the planning process? I mean, we could just identify a project and add it to the CIP, correct? I just wanna be
Correct.
clear. Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, we don't need that much detail. We can just say, this is a project, here's a general idea, and here's the money, and then we can work through that.
Exactly.
later.
Thank you.
Councilmember Steckler.
Just a clarification, maybe Director Todd can answer this. Is this similar to the grant that we got last year? Is this a green space fund, which is what last year's was? And it has to have something to do with green spaces.
Trying to get clarification from Councilmember Mead on what the limitations were.
I'm sorry, what?
We're still waiting for clarification from Councilmember Mead on what the limitations were on the budget note for that money.
Okay, so if it's similar to what they did last year and they do on an annual
It's
basis?
similar. It's similar. We just don't know. He's supposed to get back to us with the language of what the parameters are.
So just as a FYI, if be aware that if it is a green space, we need to make sure that is, the item is a green space item.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, may I throw in a few words? So I think a week or two ago, I think staff asked council if you had some ideas to email them in. As of now, we don't have any email ideas. It would be helpful if you surface those ideas so we could think about them a little bit. I'm going to give you a warning that doing a capital project often sucks other money. This is not the kind of money that would come from the council doesn't require a 50-50 match, for instance. But it would be very hard to have a project that's exactly 150. And so what often happens is if you come up with a great project, it'll take some of our own money. It also takes some of our own time. And right now we're capacity limited on how many projects we can manage. So while you might have a great idea, we've also got to think about how that might impact our execution on other projects. So free money is free money, except for it's never free. I guess that's my bottom line. So we need to be cognizant of that, think about it. Ideally, we would be in a position, and we should be in future years, we've got projects already vetted out to the scoping phase where we know about how big they would be in terms of how much time they would take, how much money it would take, and we would have those things and pick it off the list. Right now, we used up our good candidate called Silver Crest Park Rehab for last year's money. So in the future, I'd like to get to the point where we've got those kinds of things available. We're asking you to do this kind of on the fly. And I think everything that's been said tonight is true. I'm just giving you the warning that a great idea that's going to cost $750,000 is going to take 600,000 of our own. And Laurel just talked about how we don't have a lot of capital money to dedicate to new projects at this point. Thanks.
Councilmember Cavalieri.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Todd. And
lost the audio.
It sounds like it's back now. Can we test? Yeah. I can't hear the mayor.
I can only hear people on Zoom. I can't hear anybody in the room.
Okay.
Yeah, same here.
I can always not hear you.
Oh,
I
Okay,
can
hear it now.
Naomi, can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Duque, did you have a question, comment?
I did, but I don't know where the audio failed in the conversation. So if this was said already.
Start from the beginning.
Yeah, I just wanted to apologize now if I'm repeating something someone else said. I really appreciated the comment about reaching out to city council members about, you know, emailing the pet project idea. I also want to throw it out there that I do know our advisory councils, including the Parks and Recreation Board, have a list of priorities that they've been working on and have identified. And that's something that Council Member Cavallari has, you know, worked with us in terms of the last couple of months thinking through what those priorities are. So I know I can't speak for arts and beautification, but I know on Parks and Rec, I was going to say we have a list, but there is a list already, kind of ideas that have been formulating. Nothing is concrete at all, like the way Mike was sharing, but I know that there's these projects that we've identified that we think are important. So if nothing else, I'm sure Councilmember Cavallari and myself can email those ideas that we've talked about, or if you'd like to, I don't know the appropriate, you know, reaching out to the now, whoever's going to be the new chair of the board to get their ideas. But I do know that there are spaces there with ideas coming down the pipeline. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think specifically, we would really like to look at something adding some pickleball somewhere. So that's something to keep in mind. Thank you.
While we have a pause, I'm going to try to manage this schedule. How much longer do we anticipate on the budget amendments? I'm just trying to figure, we're going to need a motion to extend. Maybe I should just ask to extend till 10. We don't have to stay that long, but avoid having to extend the meeting more than once.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the meeting till 10 p.m.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The regular meeting is extended to 10 o'clock. Okay, so Laurel, please proceed.
All right. Okay, so from that, this is just a summary of everything we just talked about. It should be in your packet. It's just a change of $279,000, $279,417. And then from there, the last capital related
Back for a minute.
item.
So you can take a look at that for a second.
Can you go back to the, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just give us a second to look at this.
Yeah.
Pedestrian improvement, we're adding 142,000. Didn't we have a grant to cover that additional cost?
Correct. Yes. So that I believe that's the TIB grant, but we did have to adjust it. Let me just, here we go.
By the source of where the money's
Here we
coming
go.
from, it just identifies the increase in money we're allocating to it.
Yeah, so we just changed. Okay, so originally the crosswalk, we were estimated at 140, we revised it to 120, and then the Jackson High was merged into that complete streets. And we did have funding for that. It was mainly, I believe that's Director Todd, I'm sorry. Oh,
So
and you're on mute.
It's complicated, but basically to, I'm unmuted now. Basically, we have a commitment to complete the projects that were originally proposed to TIB for the use of their funds. And that was the crosswalks at Mill Creek Elementary and Heatherwood. Remember, the bid came in extremely high and council rejected that bid. TIB said it's okay to spend your money on these other projects, the Jackson High School crosswalk, which had a higher, we desired that one and wanted to do that one. And we're doing Heatherwood Drive sidewalk addition and the North Creek Drive pedestrian improvements with the TIB money that has to be spent by March. We need to go back with our own funds and fulfill the original commitment to TIB. Otherwise, they will never let us get another grant in the future. And so money's been added in to complete those things. I think it's a very healthy amount. I think it's too much. I think there's got to be a way to do it cheaper, but we're being prudent to make sure there's enough in there to execute that project also later in 2022. So that's why it looks like $60,000 more total is basically that $60,000 that will go towards completing those other two pieces beyond what the TIB funding is.
$60,000, even with the Complete Streets funding.
Yes. So Complete Streets funding was $300,000 total. And to be frank, some of that money was not spent. It was spent on design that then resulted in a bid that was only one bidder and it was too much money. And so we said no. So some of that is being redone this around. It's not the most efficient way to spend money. I'm not proud that we as a city have got to that point, but we're making up for past I'm not sure the right word, but I think we're going to do better. I know we're doing it better this time. We're being more thoughtful before we turn designers loose. We're being more thoughtful in scoping what we're looking for. We're being much more hands-on with the designers to make sure they don't get don't operate in a vacuum. So we had designers operating in a vacuum, and guess what? If you don't tell people what you want, you don't get what you want. I'm just being honest. If anyone would like more explanation, I'd be happy to sit down and deal with more detail. Like Laurel said, we didn't want to burrow in. You're already headed towards a very late meeting tonight. I'd be happy to sit down and show you more details if that's what you would like to see. Probably for the expediency of the meeting tonight, I would propose that we move on and you come and anybody interested, come and talk to me some more. Yeah,
I will say,
I think Laurel put it in the packet. There's more detail in the packet.
yes, in the packet there is a breakdown and you can see all of the changes. We provided the sheets that you saw in your budgets. So it'll give all of the detail and breakdown. Okay. So if no one had any other questions, we can move to surface water. And so all we had done, we removed the one project and then we added the citywide street storm pipe extension. And all the detail on that project should be in your packet. And this is actually just it's going to decrease the surface water utility expenses by $250,000. All right, and then this is actually the last slide in relation to the budget amendment. And then I have some slides for the levy, if we are ready to discuss that. And I can't hear anything, and I'm not sure.
Conclusion of the presentation on the budget and CIP amendments.
Yes.
Okay, so you wanted just to provide some property tax scenarios before we move into our discussion on items
Yes.
G and H?
Correct. I don't know if maybe before we get into this, if we want to discuss the transfer for the construction sales tax, that might be helpful to hit that first?
Do we need to make a motion for that?
No, I don't think we need a motion. I think she's just looking for head nods. I mean, I think Councilmember Steckler and I were at the point that we're better off deferring because we can't unring that bell. So if people are comfortable with that, we can provide that direction. I'm hearing 5. I can't see Councilmember Duque on my screen, but
Yes,
can't-
okay with that.
okay. So,
Perfect.
there you have that direction.
Okay, so from there, I will say everything that was done on the budget was done with a projected 0% property tax increase for the regular levy and then a 1% EMS levy increase. I did include that because typically the 1% is passed, and that EMS levy increase will cover just under 4% of the fire contract cost increase. I will say just some good news on property taxes is we were really fortunate to have new construction come in at about 25.2 million. So that's going to increase your overall assessed value. So the taxpayer is going to feel like there is a decrease in taxes no matter what decision you make tonight. So coming from that, we can move in. So we have 3 different options for regular property tax. You have the 0%. So in 2021, a resident with a $500,000 home would be paying $692.72 for the regular property tax levy. And in 2022, that would drop to $637.50. So this is just this number right here. And so with this situation, we would just bank that tax so that in the future we can use it. So our second option is the 1% increase. And so that is going to go ahead. That would change your 2021 that was at $692.72 to about $644. And so that would be an increase in city revenue of about $107,528.80. Okay, so then the last option for the regular property tax is your 1% plus the banked capacity. So this is us saying we didn't take that 1% in the last few years. So now we think we do need this with everything that's happening. And so if we do that, 2021 taxes, $692.72. And then in 2022, it would be about $654. So it's still going to be lower no matter what you do. And then from there, we have 2 options for EMS. For the 0%, the 2021 amount that the average taxpayer would be paying for a $500,000 home, well, the taxpayer, not the average taxpayer, would be $186.96. And then in 2022, that would drop to about $171.50. And from there, the last option is a 1% increase for the EMS. So this is what was budgeted throughout my presentation. For 2021, that would put us at $186.96. And then at 2022, that would drop to $173. And then from that, I can just walk through. I will say these levy scenarios for the minimum balance is the red and ending fund balance is blue. This does include if the fire contract increased at the rate it historically has. And with inflation, with the increases in salaries and the different expenses, obviously, I do feel like if we were leaning this far negative, we would have to make changes. And this is a 0% through 2026 for both EMS and property taxes. And then
Objected channel, Councilmember Bond, really quick. Those numbers you were citing are the city portion of a resident's property tax bill, not the total tax bill. It's just the city portion.
Correct. Yes, this is not your entire property tax bill. This is only our piece of it. And so just these next scenarios are just the differences if we went with a 0% regular property tax and a 1% EMS. And I will say it is hard to say what exactly is going to happen with the fire contract, with salaries, with all of our expenses. I would not panic with these numbers because they are estimated and revenues could change. Okay, and then I would just have the 1% and the 1%. And this is the final. No, I lied. So then you have 1% and the banked capacity. So this is the final slide I have. Does anyone have questions before we move?
And 1%, no bank capacity.
Yep, 1% no banked capacity is here. And I will say, if you notice the very bottom numbers, your 15% minimum balance requirement does increase as your revenues increase.
About before how a 1% property tax increase translates to approximately $65,000 citywide for the tax base. And I recall in years past, we were presented numbers showing what that, if we were to increase property taxes in 1 year by that amount, how much that would compound over 5 and 6 years. Do we have those numbers handy?
I think it's changed a little because our total assessed value is higher now. So I don't think 60 is going to be in play like it was. I think it's going to be closer to 100 but I'll defer to our finance director.
Or what is a 1% increase?
Yeah, it's the 60, it's right here. It's the $65,613. And I did not put a compounding factor together, so I do apologize for that.
That's why I don't want to throw numbers out there, but I recall seeing numbers in past budget discussions where a 1% increase 1 year translates to high six figures over the course of 5 or 6 years. Is that in the ballpark or am I just totally off?
No, you would be correct. Yes.
Oh, I can't.
Because
Sorry.
as you
People, if you're on the screen and have your hand raised, I only have one. Maybe I need to change my view. I understand Director Todd wants to make a comment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so here's how the compounding works. If you do 65 this year, the next year you would have that 65 plus you could have the 1% is another 65. And then the next year it would be the 65 and the 65 and another 65. So by delaying it, you don't get that compounding of the extra 65s. So I don't know what the number is, but it's $500,000 over the course of 4 or 5 years.
Thank you. I apologize again. If I can't see anyone on the screen, please just jump in. I'm not ignoring you. I just can't see everyone. What you wanted to present on that, Laurel?
Yes, so that is everything I have.
Any other questions on that information before we move into item G and entertain any motions to put on the table for discussion? Item G being the general property tax levy for 2022. If we're done with the screen, why don't we go with the PowerPoint? Why don't we go back to full screen? Thank you.
Grant sent motions.
No one has their
No
hand
one
up.
has a hand up yet.
Councilmember Steckler.
I'll put my hand up first. It's not going to be a popular discussion. But it is a reality, a couple of realities I'm looking at. One, the costs in our city are not going to go down. The costs are going to go up. We are going to look at everything we can to increase revenues, and a property tax increase of 1% will not cover the increases in running our city. But you brought up a great point. The compounding of a 1% increase is a significant factor in considering a property tax increase. It's a small number, but it does compound. And over a period of time, it does have an impact on our city. And we are looking at some significant increases to run our city. And we don't want to, I personally don't like taking one-time monies like ARP funds to pay down the operating cost of our city. I think we should learn how to pay to run our city, pay to afford our city, to make our city run. So I'm more of a proponent of, let's find ways to generate revenue. Let's find ways to cut costs. Let's find ways to find other ways to run our city. So when I look at the impact of a 1%, I look at the benefit of compounding. I'm in favor of a 1% property tax increase, only because of, I know what the future holds, and we have some big increases coming our way. And we need to look at ways, every way. This is just one small way, but every way we can to afford the costs that are coming down for us. So I would be in favor of a 1% property tax increase.
Robert is screaming at me to get a second to the motion before we have further discussion.
What was the motion?
Oh, did I make a motion? I was just
Thought
telling
you
you my
made a
opinion.
motion. Was that not a motion?
We're just talking.
No, that's just my opinion. I didn't make a
So
motion.
let's get a motion on the table and then have discussion. Let's follow.
Oh, gosh.
I thought you were making a motion.
Oh,
for
no, but I'm
1%.
sure going to hear a lot from the. What?
Having a discussion, aren't we?
Well, but to have discussion, there needs to be a motion on the table.
Grant sent a motion over.
We can't talk about where we're at as far before we make the motion.
Well, if we follow Robert's rules, we're supposed to have a motion on the table to have a discussion.
Well,
We haven't historically followed Robert's rules. So if I'm,
yeah, I'm more interested in getting input on the table right now. I'd like to know how fellow council members feel. I could be swayed. I'd like to get input on the table.
Okay.
Just throwing my thoughts out.
go ahead, I didn't see whose light came on first between Councilmember Cavalieri and Bond, so I'll go to Councilmember Bond first.
Okay.
Oh,
Real
there-
quick,
there's
Grant,
Attorney-
while we're doing this, could you just take another look at the utility tax rules? Because my recollection is that we were well within our authority to grant it, and that the vote of the people is required if we are trying to exceed the 6%, which we're allowed. And anything under the 6% falls under our authority and our discretion. That's my understanding, but if you could just take a peek, I could be wrong, and I don't make a habit arguing with attorneys. So take a look. I'm struggling with this, and that's why I don't, if someone made a motion for a property tax, I mean, we would then have the discussion and let it fail or something. It seems kind of inefficient. I really appreciate our finance director laying it out. 1% or even the bank capacity is not going to raise their taxes. They're going to get a break. It's simply, do we maintain some amount of the money needed to run the city? We've been blessed because it's the overall value has improved. So that's going to result in a savings. Nothing about running a city is going to be any cheaper next year. And 1%, I've been on the council when we've foregone 1%, and then we had to look at bank capacity. And I don't like that. The other issue, and the reason I ask about the utility tax issue, is I don't want to create a problem by not taking, say, 1% today, and then in 2 years reaching a spot where we now have to look at a utility tax because we maybe could have avoided that. Mill Creek is one of the very few cities in the state. I don't know if there's another one in Snohomish County that doesn't have a utility tax. It is my understanding that we're allowed to tax at up to 6%. You say, well, we could be good and we could come in at 1% or 2%. Well, you know, everybody out there knows it's just a matter of time, and it's 6%. It'll be some good reason to get there. So I've tried to keep that door closed and not open that. And maybe the day comes where we have to, and when we have to. But if we put it off, the longer we put it off, I think the better we are. So what I feel. So I'm thinking about the EMS. For me is a no-brainer. I'm going to vote for the 1% EMS. I'm just on the fence of whether we go 0 with the property tax or we consider 1%. I could go either way. I just am worried about the costs that are coming down.
Councilmember Cavalieri.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we're all in the same boat. This is the one meeting or the one conversation, every budget that comes up that everybody hates having. I look at what inflation looks like right now, and I look at the cost of a loaf of bread or what it's going to cost somebody for a Thanksgiving turkey at this point, and it's not going to get any easier. Home values are up. I also know the county is talking about a 2.5% property tax increase at this point. So I think anything we do here only adds, quite frankly, to the misery. I understand that fire costs are not getting cheaper. Matter of fact, they're going to double. It's a bridge we're going to have to cross very shortly, and a kind of a different conversation. But at this point, I would support a 0% increase on the property tax levy. I just don't think, the people can take it right now. And I understand stuff is going to cost a heck of a lot more to pay wages, to pay increases in our fees and whatnot. But right now is just not the time. I looked at our CPI. It's at, I think it was 6.1. It's the people just aren't keeping up with taxation. And here is our opportunity to pump the brakes. So I'll be supporting a 0% tax increase.
Can I second? Councilmember Luque?
There's no motion on the table. We're in discussion by the will of the majority.
I thought that's what he, well then if I can, if that's okay, I'd like to motion then for a 0% levy increase because I am a big follower of Robert's rules. And so I'd like us to keep that order. So if someone wants a second, and then we can have that discussion.
On that basis, I'll second.
Mayor Pro Tem, you were up next. Did you want to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I think I am torn because I feel like we are getting ready to have some increases on everyone with the fire contract. However, as Laurel has laid this out, the amount taxed is going to go down on everyone, regardless of whether we do the 1% or not. And in the top of my mind is that I'm out doorbelling and talking to everyone. I keep hearing concern that we need more police officers, and police officers don't come for free. And once you hire a police officer, then their salary goes up every year. So I think that I'm actually in favor of the 1% increase for that reason alone, because everyone is telling me that they want more police officers and we have to have money to pay police officers. So I'm leaning for the 1%. Thanks.
Any other comments on the motion? I'll throw my 2 cents out there. I'm going to oppose a 0% and I would support a 1% on both. And the reason being is, quite frankly, I think we need to be straight with the voters. I mean, we're talking $65,000 spread over the city. We're talking $8 or $10 a household over the course of a year. It's not a big break if we give them 0%. And our costs, as we heard from the fire discussion, from the police discussion, our costs are increasing at 3 to 5% a year. I don't think that's being straight with the voters when we tell them we can give them a break and then somehow figure out how we're going to afford these expenses, which are continuing to go up. So I would rather keep us at a steady 1%, let that compound, not yo-yo the voters back and forth with going to 0 and then dipping into bank capacity a few years later. I'd rather have a consistent policy of 1% and stick with that and see if that can give us some long-term revenue stability. So I will not be voting for a 0% property tax increase, but would support 1%. So is there any further discussion on the motion on the table for a 0% property tax increase? Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
Nay. Any abstentions? So did I get that correct? That those voting no were the Mayor Pro Tem, myself, Councilmember Steckler, and Councilmember Allison? Is that correct? And the other 3 were in the affirmative? Okay. That motion fails 4-3. Are there any other motions?
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to propose a 1% property tax increase effective next year.
Is there,
Second.
is there any further discussion? No further discussion. All those in favor of the motion, Grant, I know Grant's probably twisting up there.
He gave us
Yeah,
an ordinance.
I should have
to
done
adopt.
this for the first one, so it was correct reference.
I believe Mayor, you and the Mayor Pro Tem have a form of a motion, and it is for ordinance 2021-873, and you need to, it would be the regular property tax with a 1% increase.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Any abstentions? So I'm not sure I heard the good, who voted for?
I switched. All right,
I should have been a nay.
Okay, so it's four, that one was 4-3 in favor. Am I correct with Councilmember Steckler, Duque, myself, Mayor Pro Tem? Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay, did you get that, Naomi? Did we lose Naomi?
Yes,
again?
thank you.
Oh,
I
there you
got
are.
it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that motion
In
passes
favor.
4-3. So the other item on the agenda is the EMS levy for 2022. Any
like to-
discussion or motions?
I'd have a motion.
Go
And
ahead.
I'm only speaking Mayor Holtzclaw because I know you can't see me. So that's why
I can see you now.
Okay, good. I have my hand raised for it. I'd like, and I don't know if you need the official, that was just shown, but for the 1% for the EMS, as recommended by staff, would be my motion. Thank
Second.
you, Director Laurel. Oh,
So Grant, this would be ordinance number 2021-875.
4.
874.
874, okay. An ordinance fixing the amount of the emergency medical services property tax to be levied in 2022 and levying the same upon all taxable property, both real and personal, and the utilities subject to the taxation within the corporate limits of the city of Mill Creek for commencing January 1st, 2022 at the rate of an increase of 1%.
Councilman Bond seconded.
Yeah, Bond.
Okay,
second.
any further discussion on that motion?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I agree with, what was shared earlier. I thank you for everyone who put together this report. It was very helpful for me to understand as someone being new to this and still following along. So I really appreciate it, and thank you for recommending the 1% and making it clear.
If there's no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? That ordinance is passed 7-0. Fun first meeting, huh? Okay, that brings us, where does that bring us to? Yeah, it brings us to the interim city manager discussion. So we're now a week into our new era. I guess before we start the discussion, Grant, what are the requirements right now for us to have an interim? Do we have to have a decision? I'm just trying to make sure so we understand what all our options are before we begin a discussion.
So under RCW 35A13-150, you are able to appoint someone to assume the duties of the city manager during a period after a termination or absence in that position. And therefore you have the authority to appoint someone to do those duties. You can appoint someone to do them in an acting capacity. And then if later on you choose, depending on the duration of your search and the like, you want to have an interim, you could do that. Or you could appoint that person to serve for the entire period until the vacancy is filled.
Do the statutes speak to how long we can operate without having a city manager, an interim?
They do not.
Bless you.
Councilmember Cavallari.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'll kick this off. When the resignation came about, I think it took all of us a bit by surprise, but what we had been working toward and what we had been planning all along with the hiring of a deputy city manager or a second in command is not just to ease the help of Michael, but to create a succession plan within the city if something like this were to occur. At this point, I would advocate our deputy city manager, elevating him to the interim city manager position at this point, and I would make a motion to appoint Martin Yamamoto to the acting city manager position, pending, of course, review at some point where we decide to post for the position.
Second. And that's resolution 2021-614.
Thank you.
Discussion? Councilmember Steckler, then Councilmember Bond.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, I wasn't quite expecting us to go that quickly, but so I had some thoughts myself. I mean, we are in the midst of a big change here. We have a lot of issues that are outstanding, some of which I have, and I know many other council members may or may not share this, some grave concerns over. So my concern is stability, immediate stability for the city. And I am interested in finding an interim city manager, but I'm interested in finding an interim city manager that would meet some criteria. They, we cannot afford to not be able to hit the ground running with this individual. So I would suggest that we set some criteria of requirements, experience, knowledge in labor negotiations, contract negotiations, city management experience, all of this criteria so that they could go in and immediately take a look at our city and take a look at what's going on in our city, making suggestions and to the council and creating that stability that we need at a time when you do have a leadership change. Stability is a critical issue. The deputy city manager, other individuals, I would consider all people to be open for candidacy in this, but I would like to cast a net to actually see if in a period of a couple of weeks, if we could find some talent that could come in, that could give us that stability, to give us that assurance that I don't want to, I want to have the most qualified individual I can possibly get during this transition before we move or while we get ready to move to a search for a permanent replacement. So I know a motion has been put on the table. I would not support Martin at this particular moment as much as I would like to support a search for a qualified candidate. And I'd be open to looking at a number of different people, but I would not support one individual like Martin at this point.
Councilmember Bond.
Thank you, Mayor. I support the motion and with the caveat to give our brand new assistant city manager, or whatever the title is, Martin, the chance to bow out with dignity. He wasn't hired to be a city manager. So if for any reason he says, thank you, but I'm not comfortable, I will respect his decision and we'll revisit. But if he says, I'm up for the task and I feel ready and able, as a person myself who's brand new to a position, I can appreciate that this is quite a jump from where we brought him in at just a short time ago. So assuming he's interested in taking this, and in respect to Councilmember Steckler's comments, I share his vision and I see this as simply a temporary. In 2 days, we're going to be cutting up turkeys and doing the Thanksgiving thing. And then not too long, we're going to be celebrating Christmas and Kwanzaa and other holidays and New Year's and all this other good stuff. I want someone to just write us through the next couple of weeks. Keep the staff focused, assist them as needed in getting their tasks done, grant their time off if they need a little extra time, and get us through this. And then in January 1st, and maybe in December when we meet, we have the discussion about some of the suggestions that Councilmember Steckler suggested on what our vision is for something beyond, for us to give us a 4, 5, 6 month window and that probably involves bringing somebody from outside to come in and fill the position in a more tangible way while we move through the process of making that selection.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I do want to point out that the actual resolution that we're bringing up is specifically that we're appointing for the duration until until we decide on a permanent interim city manager or a new city manager. And that is specifically to help us navigate this time that's so busy. And then we can allow Martin to fill this role for now, and then we can come back and we can set these parameters and we can have a discussion once we've navigated everything coming at us in the next few weeks with the budget and the fire contract, and get to the new year. And then we can sit down, and maybe the permanent interim city manager will remain Martin. Maybe it will be a new candidate, but that gives us the time to do all these things that Councilmember Steckler, you were mentioning, and have a well thought out plan on who we would like to see, what we would like them to, what we would like for them to be able to do. So that is kind of the spirit of this resolution, is to put Martin in charge for now until we get to that point. And then we can determine if it's going to stay Martin or if we're going to look for someone new. Thanks.
Councilmember Duque.
Thank you. I think that was what Councilmember Vignal explained was very helpful for me, because that was my question when the motion came up, was why are we appointing an interim if I would assume just by job description or just by title that Martin's position as I believe it's deputy city manager, that you would just, if there was ever an issue with our city manager, he would have just taken over for that role. So I was confused about why we needed an interim, because I would just assume the default is that it would land onto him, and this is his responsibilities until we name for an interim. So I guess if there's like the legal reason why we're hiring, why we would be labeling him as interim, maybe for labor negotiations or things like that, and that's why we have to have that name. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of head nodding, so I think then that's the reason, and thank you for that clarification. But if anyone wants to say it out loud or vocally about why his title would need to change to interim instead of deputy.
Grant, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it is the legal requirement. Our employee is the city manager. The deputy city manager was hired by the city manager. And so our authority is to appoint a city manager who would be representing the city. So
Yeah.
is that
Yes,
accurate?
Mayor. The statute allows the council to designate a qualified administrative officer of the city to perform the duties of the manager upon the termination of services of a manager. So you have that authority. It makes sense to do that through resolution. Certainly, the deputy city manager has certain authority now, signing authority and things, but this would be a way of designating that that role to and authorizing him to perform the duties of the manager during the period of this appointment.
Brief, I was going to answer that question as well and just say that we have, as a council, one employee, and it was not the deputy city manager. So there's a need to fill the position at this point. Secondly, we are currently, and everybody on the dais, and I think everybody in the public knows this, we're probably juggling more balls in the air than any councils really care to. And I know we're going to get busy, and I know how long I've done this before, and so has some of you a couple of times, that how long the process is to recruit, hire, onboard, interview, all the above. It's a lengthy process, and I just don't see why we would add to our tasks just when we need somebody really to just steer the rudder at this point. We have a guy in Martin that is for the most part plug and play. He's familiar with all the issues the city are facing at this point. And to Councilmember Bond's point, I would like to know that. Maybe I could just ask him now if it's something he was interested in doing. I don't know if this is the appropriate time. Maybe I'm just wasting wind here, but at this point, I think it might be appropriate to ask him before we keep going down the rabbit hole. Thanks.
Sure, I appreciate that, Councilmember Cavallari. I just to be forthcoming about the situation and where I'm at, and then I had a discussion with the mayor yesterday, and point blank, I understand Councilmember Steckler's concern as well, and I share that concern, and I'm looking forward to this phase and when we do find a new city manager, and I think at some point in time, I think that's very important. We are at a time when we have a few months left in the year. And so my thought was yesterday was for these 2 months, at least I can just help out and fill that role. And if you wanted to go externally after that point in time, maybe that's the time to do it. But there's going to be a time that you have to look for that position too. That also falls into place. How long it's going to take you? What are you going to look for? How long it's going to take your the phase? How long is the phase going to take for council to hire somebody down the road too? So there's a lot of questions that are unanswered in terms of this whole process. But yeah, these few months, I think my suggestion is to steer that rudder until you find maybe another interim, or if you want to keep me, I'm open. And as I told our mayor, I'll support whatever all of you decide.
Councilmember Steckler?
Okay, a couple thoughts. One, the resolution, one of my concerns was in paragraph 3 of the resolution. It states that this individual will be put in place pending the selection and appointment of a new manager. So that caused me some concern. And then if you read down later, based on what Mayor Pro Tem said, pending such time as either another is appointed as an interim city manager, a new city manager is hired. So the document's rather confusing. It's when one paragraph says this person will be in place until we hire a new manager. And that I think what I'm hearing here, it's some different things. What we're talking about, and when we went through this process before, we did not have a resolution. The process before was to put somebody in place temporarily for the next few weeks, 2 weeks, whatever, to have someone that the employees can go to. That makes sense. What Councilmember Bond said made sense. I have no problem with that, and I think no problem with Martin and in that type of a role. What I'm worried about is I want us to get to an interim city manager who would be in place and be there for a period of time until we go through the search process. And the search process can take months. That can be a long, drawn out process. So I want I want us to get to stability. And so if we're talking about Martin in a position for the next few weeks, I'm fully supportive. I have to revert to Grant. We did not go through a resolution, Grant, the last time we went through this process with our city manager. We just appointed somebody as an interim until we, or a standing person, until we brought in an interim city manager who filled the position until we went through the search process and hired a city manager. So maybe this is something new, but it's a little confusing. I think what I want to clarify was I am supportive of Martin being in a, I don't know what you call it, acting position to get us through the next few weeks or to the end of the year. That's fine. But I don't want to slow down this council's efforts to search and find an interim city manager who has the experience and qualifications to get us under control through the search process, which can be a long process.
Councilmember Steckler, if I could just elucidate on the resolution itself. The third paragraph recites what the statute says. The operative language of the resolution, the action that the council would be taking is to designate a specific person to perform the duties of city manager until such time as either another is appointed as an interim city manager or a new city manager is hired. So that is the action specified by the resolution. So I think that meets exactly what you described.
The action does, the third paragraph says something different.
You just explained it. That's reciting what the statute says.
Yeah.
So in a resolution, that's what caused my confusion.
No.
I find the resolution confusing.
Okay. Just a few thoughts before we call the vote. The practical reality is we have a special meeting next week with a packed agenda. I'm going to be gone the following week and I would like to be part of the discussion. So the reality is we can't get to the very discussion. Be with you, Councilmember Steckler. We need to have and we're going to have. We need to have a decision amongst the 7 people sitting up here, probably before the end of December, as to whether or not we select someone internally or externally to be an interim. As a point of fact, we did do this exact same thing when Rebecca was separated. We appointed Chief Elwin as the interim city manager until we decided to hire Bob Stowe. So we did exactly what we're
But we did
proposing.
not have a resolution. We did not have to go through
I
this.
can't speak to that, but I'm
That's
not
what I'm
going to
talking
get
about.
hung up on the logistics of a resolution. I believe we need to formally appoint him for him to have the due authority as the interim. So
When we did Chief Elvin, we didn't need the resolution. We just said, you're appointed. That's the point I'm making. We didn't have to go through this.
I don't recall that, but the point being, I'm not sure that that matters. We need to appoint someone to keep the ship steered in the right direction for the coming weeks. And with your point of needing to have that discussion, no one planned to be absent on the 28th, because I don't think we're going to have the luxury in December of skipping a meeting that we traditionally would skip, because we've got a lot of things, and this is top on that list for us to have this discussion of what we want to do for an interim on a more permanent basis going forward. So we can start that discussion on the 14th and continue it on the 28th, assuming everyone's going to be available to meet. But I agree with you, that is a priority item to discuss. Okay, is there any further discussion?
Mayor, just one point of order. If Deputy City Manager Yamamoto is appointed, I would also, I don't know if I need to put this in a motion, but make sure he's compensated correctly as the city manager is supposed to be compensated, and all the benefits therein. Thank you.
Grant, is that, well, I guess if that's an amendment to your motion, I forgot who made the motion, and is there the second accept that amendment? Is that appropriate amendment, Grant?
I think that will, I think we can see that happens without an amendment, but if Councilmember Cavallari would prefer to have it in the resolution to memorialize it, it certainly can be.
I think based upon your representation that we can make that adjustment administratively if the motion's approved, then he was fine with the motion as is. Okay, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Okay, the motion passes 6-0 to 1. That brings us to, where are we? Consent agenda. Consent agenda is item J, approval of checks number 63975 through 64024 and the ACH wire transfers in the amount of $3,165. The audit committee was myself and the mayor pro tem. Were there any exceptions?
No exceptions.
No exceptions. Item K, payroll and benefit ACH payments in the amount of $206,308.88. Any exceptions?
No exceptions.
And city council meeting minutes of November 9th, 2021. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The consent agenda is approved. Briefly on my report for tonight, I was going to touch on the fire discussions, which we already touched upon. I just wanted to share that on Wednesday after our last meeting, the interim city manager called a leadership meeting of the department heads of Director Todd, Director Gimzo, and the police chief, and invited us to come talk to him to just get everyone on the same page. I thought it was a very productive meeting. We mainly were focusing on all the items we have to do over the next 2 or 3 meetings, a lot of which we got done tonight. So we're going to continue those discussions moving forward. I look forward to working with not just our interim city manager, but all the directors to keep us moving forward. Mayor Pro Tem, any report tonight?
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to start off by welcoming Connie Allison and Melissa Duque tonight. It's wonderful to have both of you. I hope you enjoyed your first meeting. And also, I'd like to thank everyone who worked really hard for the Veterans Day event. I brought Cora up and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. We had donuts. it was just really nice to see everyone out and honor our veterans. I'm so grateful that we do something to honor our veterans every year. Also, I do want to reiterate that I was with the mayor in the meeting that interim city manager put together. And I feel like it was a really good meeting, and we had a great discussion with the directors. And I know for myself, I reiterated to everyone that we are stepping up to the plate right now and that we're all in this together. I think sometimes there's this idea that it's the city council against the staff. And I reiterated to them that we are all one team and we are all working on this together so that we can all win. And I think that's really important. And I just want to thank all of them, the directors and all the staff, for all their work that they're doing. And they're stepping up to the plate right now with everything we have to get done before the end of the year. And just thank them. Thank you.
Councilmember Bond, any report?
No report.
Councilmember Steckler,
No report.
Councilmember Cavallari.
Yes, Mayor, just real quick. I want to, I guess, piggyback on the Mayor Pro Tem and welcome our new council members on board, Council Members Duque and Councilmember Allison, and thank them for their hard work and participation in the electoral process. And we are honored and proud to have them. Thank you.
Councilmember Allison, any report after 3 hours and 17 minutes on the job?
No, happy to be here.
Councilmember Duque, any report this evening?
Absolutely. It's very long. It's very long and drawn out. No, I just wanted to apologize that I'm not there in person. Thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity. I'd also like to ask formally or informally that this opportunity is allowed to me next week, because I wasn't planning on being, I was still, for Thanksgiving break, was going to be down here. So I wouldn't be able to attend in person the November 30th meeting. And so just wanted to share that and hope that that's okay with everyone.
Okay. Interim city manager, your reports this evening, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just also wanted to reiterate what both you and the Mayor Pro Tem mentioned about our meeting last week, and to also recognize the commitment of our employees. Over the past number of months that I've been here, I have seen, given the capacity that we have across the city of Mill Creek, a tremendous work ethic. And I think I'm pretty confident that that's going to move forward into these next few stages as you look for a new city manager. In my report, I have 4 items, one of which is going to be a verbal report by the police chief. It's going to update us on our lateral police hiring process. The following 3 are summaries that will be attached that I will speak to after the chief gives his short presentation. Chief.
Good evening, everyone. Mayor, Member Pro Tem, members of council, I'm pleased to provide you with some positive updates to our hiring processes. On Monday, November 15th, we conducted command interviews with 3 lateral candidates. The following date, we issued out conditional offers of employment that were sent to those 3 candidates. Then on Friday, November 19th, we conducted a second round of oral boards with 4 additional lateral candidates, which will give us approximately 7 people to choose from, which is very positive news. On November 23rd, the notice of results were sent out to the second round of candidates. And additionally, we have received acceptance of the first 3 conditional offers of employment sent out. So we have polygraph examinations set for Tuesday, November 30th for the second group. And we are currently scheduling command interviews for that second group as well. We are planning for a special session of the Civil Service Commission for December 3rd to certify that second list. And we hope to have the first 3 candidates on board by January 3rd of 2022, with the second round on board by the end of January. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Make that happen. Any questions, comments? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
All right, the second report is, Mayor, you have emphasized a report on the 35th Avenue Southeast collision regarding the fatality on October 15th. We added the April fatality summary update as well, and that's uploaded on our agenda item. So that's there to read. If anybody have any questions, you may have questions throughout this evening. So until I get the other ones, you might want to come back if you have a chance to read it. The second one is a CIP project update on Silvercrest Park. And that summary is also uploaded, providing a summary timeline and a total project cost. And the final one is the complete street pedestrian improvement update. Involves 3 projects, including Jackson High School, Heatherwood Drive, where the sidewalk that connects North Creek and the Buffalo Everett Highway. And then the final project is North Creek Drive pavement markings and signage to improve the pedestrian and bicycle use on the shoulder. So those are, all 3 summaries are uploaded for viewing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That all the reports?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. That brings us to audience communication. Would anyone like to address the council one last time before we adjourn? Going once, twice? Well, with that, we will not be adjourning to executive session, and we'll adjourn the regular meeting at 9:21 p.m. Thank you, everyone, and have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next Tuesday for our special meeting.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.